It's been more of a rocky start to the Pelicans season than expected, so is it time for a significant changeup? If it is, then I'll explain why Karl-Anthony Towns of the Minnesota Timberwolves is the right trade choice for the Pels. It's Friday's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go!
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Friday, first real trade episode of the season so far. And we got a big name in here, and you know what? He might actually be on the trade block. The fit makes a lot of sense, and he might be cheaper than what you're expecting in Karl-Anthony Towns. So we're going to devote the whole show to Karl-Anthony Towns, why you're making this trade now, why he's the right guy, and who we would include in that, including a couple of different deals, because there's different ways you could probably structure a deal like this. So, of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here, the #1 Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know about the team, giving you the X's and O's insight into why the Pelicans beat the Dallas Mavericks this week. Aaron Summers of the Pelicans, basically, on the show yesterday, giving you more insight into going-ons around the team. We have the guests, we have the insight, now the trade talk here as well. So make sure you are subscribed wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Comment down below on YouTube. Is Karl-Anthony Towns your #1 trade target, or is there someone else you want? And of course, support Locked On Pelicans by becoming an everydayer. If you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. All right. If you're a longtime listener of this show, do I normally like Karl-Anthony Towns? The answer to that is no. This has not been a guy that I've ever really wanted them to trade for until now. And there's a couple of reasons why. So let's get into, right off the bat on the show, why Karl-Anthony Towns. So it goes to a couple of things. And it starts with Jonas Valanciunas, the JV problem. It just doesn't fit. Right? He played 22 minutes against the Dallas Mavericks. It's very clear the Pelicans want to play smaller. They want to play with more shooting, play faster. And Jonas Valanciunas just doesn't fit that. Again, he is a talented offensive player, and as they look to change or upgrade the center position, I don't really want them to go with someone who's worse on offense. Towns, not worse offensively than Jonas Valanciunas. Shoots threes, all those things. We'll get into more about him as a player in a second here. But go back to this Mavs game again, and it's a bit of an outlier because you can play small against Derek Lively II, who is their starting center and is a rookie. But when you look at what they did with that defensively, they used Herb Jones on him a lot. They didn't put a traditional center on Derek Lively. It was Herb Jones. If you look at Herb Jones' matchup data in this, he spent more time defending Derek Lively II than he did Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving combined. And Aaron Summers even talked about that in yesterday's show. If you can do that with Herb Jones, if Herb is capable of doing that, do you truly need that kind of traditional center archetype like Jonas Valanciunas? One of the things you worry about with changing this up or playing small is big men killing you. But if you have Herb Jones doing that, do you need a very good defensive center? Not that Jonas Valanciunas is a good defensive center anyway. But the answer is no. And again, it just kind of spells the writing on the wall for Jonas Valanciunas. The only reason a deal hasn't happened yet is it's just kind of tough to find that. But you also still need to get offensive production, which Jonas Valanciunas definitely does. You also need shooting, which, look, Jonas can hit some threes. Well, you also need rebounding too. You know, you might not get as good of rebounding as you get with Jonas Valanciunas, but the Pels have at least shown at times they can get defensive boards. Enter Karl-Anthony Towns. You know, it's one of those things now where even if he's not like you've been my #1 option for years and years and years, it just makes sense. When you look at the Minnesota Timberwolves right now, they're really good. They're really good, and I believe in that team. And Towns is having basically his worst year as a pro outside of his rookie year. Anthony Edwards has become the undisputed star of that Minnesota team, and that dude is going to be freaking amazing. He's already amazing. You have Rudy Gobert now playing at a high level, looking at like he's the 3-time Defensive Player of the Year again. Towns is taking a back seat to all of this. He hasn't played particularly well. Yes, he's averaging over 20 points per game, but he's doing it on the lowest shooting percentage of his career from the field. He's getting to the line less than he ever has. He's not involved in the offense, the focal point, as much as he used to be. His assist numbers are down because of all of this. So with that said, maybe they're open to moving him. His contract also factors into this, and we'll get into that a little bit more in the next segment, but he has a supermax that kicks in next year. Next year, I don't want to talk about this number just yet because that's important. Next season, he makes $49 million. 53 the year after that, 57 in 2026-27, and then in the 2027-2028 season, he has a player option for $61 million. If Minnesota can be equally as good without Karl-Anthony Towns, while also essentially shedding a $200 million contract, that seems like a very good thing for them to go out and try and do. And given how good the team has been, and they are excellent defensively, owing to the fact that you have Rudy Gobert, you have Anthony Edwards, who's great defensively too. They have Jaden McDaniels, who's one of the better wing players in the league, wing defensive players in the league. Does Towns fit into that? Maybe they want to build a defensive identity and put more complementary pieces, potentially, around Anthony Edwards. That seems like a sound option for Minnesota, to be perfectly honest with you. So it just makes Towns seem like the odd man out when it comes to all of this. But he's a good three-point shooter, and he does it in volume. He's taking over 6 3-point attempts per game. He's shooting them at 36%. For his career, he shoots 39.4% from 3 on over 4 attempts. And that, if you were to factor out his rookie year, how many attempts does he average, and what is the number here when he didn't do it as much? There he's taking 5 attempts per game and shooting 40% from 3. That's the type of center that you want to put next to Zion Williamson. He is the self-proclaimed, Towns is, Cat is, the self-proclaimed, and he's not, like best shooting big man of all time. That's Dirk. It's Dirk. It's not Karl-Anthony Towns, but he's pretty good. He's got range. He can play down low, and he's also a good enough rebounder too. His rebounding percentage isn't, the extreme highs that Jonas Valanciunas is, and I'm pulling up the numbers here, but he's not like horrifically far off. His defensive rebounding rate this season is 25%. That's good. The Pelicans need someone like that. Jonas is consistently around like the 30s or up, but this season's 27.7, close to what Towns is doing. You can probably then get away with having Towns there, and your rebounding won't suffer too much. So I think Towns just makes a ton of sense. He will space the court for Zion. He will add more shooting in there, potentially space the court for Brandon Ingram too. And it gives you just another shooter out there on the court at a position of need for fit. I don't know. It makes a lot of sense. So why do you do the deal now? That the timeliness of this is important. And I want to get into that next. And let's look at including CJ McCollum in a deal, Brandon Ingram even in a trade, all of those things that's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about Betterhelp because this show is sponsored by Betterhelp. It's the end of the year. Are you looking forward to the holidays? Do you struggle with seasonal blues? Have you accomplished what you wanted to accomplish this year? Have you grown like you want to grow? This time of year can be a lot, and it's natural to feel some sadness or anxiety about it. So adding something new and positive to your life can counteract some of those feelings. I've had big life changes. Therapy has helped me kind of work through that, learn positive coping skills, kind of understand myself a little bit better so I can set better boundaries with people, that I know how I just work and tick a little bit better. And it lets me just go through life a whole lot easier. So therapy isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. Maybe you just want to become the best version of yourself. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. What I love about it is it's entirely online. I don't have time to go to doctor's offices. This is convenient, flexible, suited to my schedule because I can just hop on a video call. So find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans, I love this one, it's brought to you by Game Time. Game Time just makes buying tickets easy. It can be a frustrating experience. Whether you're looking to go to a Pelicans game, or I was actually looking at the Formula One race in Las Vegas, you're at various sites, there's fees. You click on the price, you think it's going to be that, and it's like double. Are you getting good seats? You don't necessarily know. You want to get the best value for your money. So Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying your tickets. It's going to give you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You get to see the view from your seats before you buy, so you know what your sightlines are going to look like. The all-in price shows it up front, no hidden fees or anything like that. And with the Game Time guarantee, that means you're always going to get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. You can buy with that peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Just made it cheaper for you to go to a Pels game. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, coming to y'all like nobody else does. Again, game recaps, breaking down how and why they won the game. Big guests like Aaron Summers. We have Will Guillory on every other week. Aaron's coming on once a month. I talked to Antonio Daniels the other day. He wants to be on the show. We're going to have great guests here for you all season long. The trade talk, the trade rumors. Support the channel by subscribing and becoming an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday. And comment down below on YouTube. You want him to trade for Karl-Anthony Towns? Do you like that idea? And if you really want to support the channel, Locked On Pelicans Insiders Group. I was texting with everybody before the game on Tuesday, giving you insight there about the injuries, about the court stuff, and other things I was hearing. It's the only way to interact with me like that. You want to text me? That's the best way to do it. So here's why you need to do a trade for Karl-Anthony Towns this season, not wait to see what they have here. You can't do that if you realize Towns is your guy. So if, say, the Pelicans front office determines Towns is the missing piece, we have to go and get him. Maybe we can wait to see what we have. Maybe the trade value of some of our guys goes up. You can't do that this year. I just talked about his Supermax extension, which kicks in, right? $49 million next season is what he's going to make. He makes $36 million this year. That's a $13 million difference. You know how much easier it is to match the salary there? No team has $50 million in salary to trade. Trades need to have the salary match in the NBA. 36 is a whole lot easier than 49. 36 works with CJ McCollum outright. You could just trade Karl-Anthony Towns for CJ McCollum outright. Same for Brandon Ingram too. But let's start there. A trade for CJ McCollum and what it would look like. And I don't think we need to get too complicated here. I think you could include Karl-Anthony Towns coming to New Orleans, CJ McCollum, and like one first-round pick, maybe one of the pick swaps somewhere in there too if you really wanted to. I don't think you need to include that much in a trade for Karl-Anthony Towns. On ESPN's Hoop Collective podcast, Brian Windhorst, make of that what you will, said he doesn't think they could get picks for Karl-Anthony Towns right now. His value's low. That salary, that money there is scaring off a lot of teams. And the Pelicans, by making a trade like this, are committing a whole lot of money. You're deep into the luxury tax, pushing second apron, which, if you don't know what that means, go back and listen to my show on the new collective bargaining agreement. Basically, it puts you into like near punitive levels. So you can't give up that much because you need those first round picks to replenish your roster. So CJ McCollum for Karl-Anthony Towns. That gives a little bit more depth around Anthony Edwards, another shooter for him to go out there and play with, a guy that can run point for them so they're not necessarily relying on Nickeil Alexander-Walker, gives you some insurance in case Mike Conley gets injured. That could be a very useful thing for him. And it puts Towns in New Orleans. And it also maybe allows the Pelicans then to get a little bit more creative with some of their starting units, right? It also adds, in a sense, some depth for the Pelicans. The backup big man spot has not been good for the Pels this year. Unfortunately, Larry Nance Jr. has not played particularly great. This would move Jonas Valanciunas to the bench because you're not starting Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, Karl-Anthony Towns, and Jonas Valanciunas in this lineup. JV moves to the bench. in this case, and in comes Karl-Anthony Towns. So you have Karl-Anthony Towns, Zion Williamson, Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram, Trey Murphy, anybody, once he's healthy, and put more shooting out there on the court. You have two shooters in Towns and Murphy. You have Brandon Ingram, who's maybe, let's call him half a shooter here. It's a little bit better than where they stand right now with some of the guys. You know, you can then let Jonas Valanciunas anchor those second lineups with the shooters lineup like he was doing with CJ. See if then Brandon Ingram can kind of step into that role that CJ did in that comeback win, where I had technical difficulties. That's why that show was late, at the hotel, over the Oklahoma City Thunder. So it adds, in a sense, depth to the Pelicans. You get what I mean by moving a starter to the bench. You can run some second units with JV where he's the anchor there and let him cook. Put shooters around him, feed him. He's been a good passer this season. Maybe see what happens there. It's a significant change to your rotation and what you're doing. And I don't like losing CJ McCollum's veteran leadership, which I do think is really important. And his shooting has also been very good this year. But the fit just seems to be a little bit better. And by not giving up too much for Towns, maybe you go and get another guard with some of the other picks and things like that you have. It just makes sense, doesn't it? Again, there's reasons to not love this trade. You know, you'd like to see if you could include like bit players and things like that. And I looked at, you know, could you include something like Jonas Valanciunas, Larry Nance Jr., Kyra Lewis, and maybe like Najee Marshall in a deal like this. And maybe you would need to include Najee Marshall in this trade anyway. CJ, Najee, and a first-round pick for Karl-Anthony Towns. They'd probably like a little bit more depth there in Minnesota if you're losing Towns. That makes sense. But I just don't see a way that you can get that done while keeping CJ, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson all on the team. That'd be cool. I'd love that. I just don't see a world in which Minnesota does that because you're not giving them, well, I think they wouldn't hate trading Towns for a pick or two and a bunch of like solid role players. JV, Kyra, Nance, and Najee is like not that, right? JV, okay. You can't start him alongside Rudy Gobert. That doesn't make any sense. So is he running your second unit? Maybe that's what you really need to do, but do they want that there? Not necessarily. JV's just like an odd fit right now with his contract and everything in the NBA. It's unfortunate for a guy that I really like that has been good to the Pelicans and all of that. Or maybe they just want him as an expiring deal. Something like that too could be why they want it. But I just don't see a deal going like that. So I think it would have to be CJ, but like one pick, maybe two. Probably somewhat protected picks too, just in case things go south for the New Orleans Pelicans. It seems like that could be the way to go. Would you do that trade? Karl-Anthony Towns for CJ McCollum, let's say Najee Marshall, and like 1.5 first-round picks. Let's call it that just to make it a little bit easier. But you have to do this deal now. $36 million this season versus $49 million next year. You won't be able to match the salary next season. So if this is your guy, you have to go and get him. Maybe that kind of bumps it up to 2 second-round picks because, well, if you want him, you got to go and do it immediately. 2 second-round picks, 2 first-round picks, because you've got to go and do that immediately. I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting idea, and I don't hate it. I like the shooting. I think I can buy into the rebounding here being okay. Team would be scary good offensively, and I think it would really work. What about Brandon Ingram, though? Is that potentially the move to do? Would Minnesota even want that? Let's look at that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about Prize Picks because Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros, sharks, people with algorithms and more monitors and stuff than you, it's very easy. You pick more or less than the projection on 2 to 6 players, and then you watch the winnings roll in. And with basketball season alongside football season, you can now pick combo projections across both sports. You can take LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and receptions. You could also just take Zion Williamson, to score more or less than 22.5 points, which is his projection for this game. It's great. They also offer you a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return for the second. That player's rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. It's fun. You know these sports, you know these players, you know what they're going to do. Just go and pick more or less over at prizepicks.com. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. If you deposit $100, they're going to give you $100. It's free money right there. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code LockedOnNBA. PrizePicks, it's daily fantasy sports made easy. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, breaking down everything you want to know. Again, great guests, talking trades, breaking down the X's and O's of the game, what this team's trying to do. Now, if you want more sports, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. This is super cool. I do Locked On NBA. It runs on there. It was just awesome seeing myself on this thing. Like, I know that sounds a little like vain and all of that, just a cool project to be part of. And I'm very proud to be part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I thank you all for being here. You all love Locked On and supporting it. Go listen to Locked On Saints too, because Ross Jackson is the best. So let's keep talking about Karl-Anthony Towns as we start to wrap up this show here of Locked On Pelicans this week of Locked On Pelicans. It's been a fun week, I'll be honest. I've really been just hyped up talking with y'all. So again, I really appreciate y'all supporting the channel. The show is for you because you're passionate fan base. New Orleans is a basketball city. So we just looked at CJ McCollum in a trade. What about Brandon Ingram? Brandon Ingram straight up for Karl-Anthony Towns, no picks involved. Would you do that? You know, it's been a little bit of an open question. Can Zion and Brandon Ingram coexist? They have definitely struggled with that this season. If you're trying to maximize one of them, you know, maybe you do that by moving on from one of them. You know, could you see a starting lineup where you have CJ McCollum, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Zion Williamson, and Karl-Anthony Towns? CJ's a shooter, Trey's a shooter, Towns is a shooter. You have three shooters out there in the starting lineup while you get defense with Herb Jones. We just talked in yesterday's show about how good he is. And then Zion. The spacing on that should be kind of incredible, to be perfectly honest, if you think about it. You know, part of the issue with Zion and BI not coexisting is the shot profile of both of them. It's tough to build around two-star players that just don't take threes. Zion never will because of, you know, he's a big man. Brandon's a wing, but he prefers the mid-range. And he had a very good game against the Dallas Mavericks, kind of taking what the defense gave him and being more aggressive and driving to the basket, which I thought was really important from him. But he's not the three-point shooter. And that's been an issue. And we've seen him at times double down on some of his bad traits, not passing the ball, isolation heavy. That's not what the Pelicans want to do at all. So do you just move on from it? You know, I think there's an argument to be made for that. I don't love the idea, to be perfectly honest. I'd almost rather Minnesota include a pick. If you gave me Karl-Anthony Towns and a pick for Brandon Ingram, you could really sell me on that. You know, while you have this big extension in place for Towns, Brandon Ingram's going to be extension eligible after this season. Do you feel comfortable paying Brandon Ingram a supermax deal should he qualify for it? I don't think that I would. I don't think he's going to end up qualifying for it. I don't think he's going to make an all-NBA team to be able to qualify for it, but I wouldn't, you know, if he doesn't make it, then the money's less. That makes me feel a little bit better about things, but I wouldn't feel great about a supermax right now. Could change for Brandon Ingram. So maybe you just avoid that problem of do you pay him or not by moving on from him and bringing in Karl-Anthony Towns. You just kind of remove that from the equation. I like the sound of that starting lineup. You still have Jonas Valanciunas anchoring that second unit. Now with CJ McCollum, you can run a second unit of CJ, two shooters in Matt Ryan, Jordan Hawkins, Herb Dyson, and then Valanciunas. I mean, we've seen that lineup be really effective this year. That seems great. You can deploy Valanciunas really when you need to and let him kind of just cook in those lineups. It's an expensive option, but you can probably then feel a little bit better about letting him his contract expire after the season, not getting anything in return for him. So it kind of then gives you that depth that you need again while still giving you an elite starting unit. I don't hate this idea. It seems like a better way to kind of maximize the roster they have. Same with if you include CJ McCollum in a trade. And again, I don't think you're going to be able to do this by shipping out, Larry Nance Jr., Valanciunas, some just other like floatsome, right? It's kind of what it is, just salary floatsome weight, and bringing in Karl-Anthony Towns. I don't know if Minnesota would necessarily want Brandon Ingram. Given that Anthony Edwards is the star of their team, the unquestioned star of that team, and look at Team USA where BI did not play well alongside Anthony Edwards, do you really want to run that on your NBA team? Their answer might just be like, no, that's not going to happen at all. And I think that's very valid. Maybe a little short-sighted on their part, but I think that makes a lot of sense. So I think you're more likely to get a deal done with CJ. But let me know in the comments down below, are you more inclined to trade? Say this is going to happen. Say it's going to happen, right? This is the scenario. They're trading for Towns. Are you giving up CJ or are you giving up Brandon Ingram? Let me know in the comments down below. I think you could argue for either of them. It's unfortunate, but it's just kind of the realities of what we're looking at. I also think this team could be fine and they don't necessarily need to make a trade like this. But if you're going to do it, you've got to do it this season, as we've said, because of his salary and how it changes with that extension kicking in next year. I think they'll still be fine defensively. I don't think you'd miss a beat trading either CJ or Brandon Ingram for Towns. I think the rebounding will be okay. It's still going to be a concern, but they figured out in the past. There's no reason to think they won't figure it out this season too, because it's a stark difference and it's a little bit surprising. I don't know. I'm intrigued by the idea of trading for this guy. He's still young too. There's maybe room for him to grow, in terms of play a little bit. He's 28 years. It's his birthday when I'm recording this. I'm recording this on the 15th, so a day before I normally would. Happy birthday, Karl-Anthony Towns. I had no clue about that. I had no clue it was his birthday. Got to be a sign, right? We're doing a show about Karl-Anthony Towns on his birthday, even though you're getting this 2 days later because this show's out on the 17th. That the universe telling us something here. Did we just manifest this and make it happen? Maybe that's the power that Locked On has. It does not have that kind of power. I wish it did. I would also not be using it on basketball stuff, and I would go and win the lottery. That's a good sign to end the show right here, end the week of shows right there. I would actually use it on the Pels, and I would absolutely make sure they're winning a title if I had that kind of power. The show would do well then. So there you go. Now you know my future plans if I ever develop. I need to stop. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, this week of Locked On Pelicans. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Be back with y'all on Monday to recap the game against the Nuggets. And then I forget who they're playing the next night. We're going to recap the weekend on Monday's episode. See y'all then.